Beat-em-ups were all the rage in the late 80s and early 90s, though not all of them have aged well. The genre essentially began with Renegade in 1986. It was the first of its kind, but that also means it was very unpolished. Low frame rate, choppy animation, and sluggish controls all plagued the game. Soon after, in 1987, Double Dragon hit the scene, and that was the arcade's first big beat-em-up smash hit. This was the game that popularized the genre, but for Capcom, their beat-em-up legacy started with Final Fight in 1989. With Double Dragon, for some, the backwards attack buttons took some getting used to. Final Fight simplified the control scheme by having only 2 buttons, attack and jump, though you could also combine buttons for a more powerful attack that takes away life and also do a grab. This made the game more user-friendly and accessible. It also had larger, more detailed sprites, making it more pleasing to the eye. Final Fight was originally going to be called Street Fighter 89. Yeah, a sequel to the terrible version of Street Fighter, not the one we all know and love. They changed the name to Final Fight because the gameplay style was so different. This is a beat-em-up and that was a fighter, so I think it was a good decision and probably helped not to confuse players. Both of the series contain the car smashing though, so that's a similarity. Growing up, I owned the SNES port of Final Fight, and I didn't know until later that the arcade original had more stages and it was obviously superior. One difference is the boss at the end of round 4. The dude moves around like Nightcrawler. It's a pretty awesome fight, but very tough. The most annoying enemies in the game are the guys called Hollywood. They have this attack where they jump on top of you with their knives, and it's just relentless. But the most memorable enemy was the one that looked like Andre the Giant. Everybody used to laugh about that back in the day, though they actually had to alter his name. My favorite part of the game is actually during the end credits. Guy kicks Cody in the face because he's jealous that he gets the girl. You can see the designers had some fun. As far as the gameplay goes, I've only got one tip. If the rule in Ghosts and Goblins is get the knife, the rule in Final Fight should be get the pipe. After Final Fight, Capcom went on to make Dynasty Wars in 1989. This is your typical beat-em-up game, with the only difference being the entire game you are bound to your horse. You fight legions of enemies in 8 levels, which tend to drag. One of the only things that keeps the game fresh is that every level you get a slight upgrade to your weapon. You can hold down the button to charge your sword, and you have another attack that can bring in help. One brings in a group of archers, another an explosion which hits most of the enemies on the screen, and lastly, a warrior that'll come to your aid. The warrior is the worst one because it seems like he barely does anything and then he just rides away. And the controls are Double Dragon 2 style, where you attack to a particular side depending on which button that you hit. It's not a terrible game, but it is heavily repetitive. I do like the gory end of level screens when you kill a boss though. Next, in 1991, Capcom released Captain Commando, which served as their original mascot before Mega Man. This arcade game had 4 characters to choose from, and I have to say, Captain Commando is the least interesting character of the bunch. He's just a generic soldier and has an energy attack. Big deal. Next character is Mac the Knife, a pun off the famous song of the same name. Mac seems like a throwback to the knife-wielding enemies from Final Fight. Then there's the ninja, Ginzu, and he's pretty decent, but another knife pun? Why not? He's also the only character that can throw ninja stars, which is pretty cool. But the best character, definitely, is the Robo-Baby. Who wouldn't want to play as an infant in a rocket-shooting armored mech? He seems to have the best reach of any of the players, and I think it's hilarious that he can get into the mechs when he's already riding one of his own. And is this where they got the idea to ride around in mechs in Mega Man X? It's Capcom, so I have to assume that's where the inspiration came from. The only problem with the mechs is that they're very hard to get into because the enemies will usually knock you out of it before you get much of a chance to move. Overall, the gameplay is kept fresh because there's an arsenal of weapons that you can use as you go. Torching enemies with the grenade launcher is brutal yet satisfying. And what's up with this enemy? Is that short for Shitstorm? One of the best things about the game is the gruesome death animations. They were not afraid to show ultra-violent deaths, making it feel like something only adults were allowed to see. Of course, much of this was removed for the Super Nintendo version, which is why the arcade will always be the version you're going to want to go for. Next was King of the Dragons, a fantasy game which seemed like something ripped right out of a J.R.R. Tolkien novel. In this one, you could choose between 5 different characters, which were all pretty generic. The archer and wizard have projectile attacks, the cleric and fighter just fight, and the dwarf is strong but slow. Along the way, you find weapons to upgrade your character. In that way, it reminds me of Dynasty Wars, but here there's a ton more variety. Points actually matter in this game because you can level up your character, which makes their health increase. Now, the magic attacks work in several ways. When you press both the attack and the jump at the same time, each character can do some type of powerful magic storm that will hit most everything on the screen. When you use the spell yourself, it costs you health, which is typical of the beat-em-up genre. None of the AI in the game really does anything too interesting. The bosses all attack similar to the regular enemies. The most you can expect is that some of the enemies will block with a shield, but that's about it. Well, also a few of the bosses, like the dragons, have to be fought with jumping aerial attacks, but that's about as much range as you're gonna get. This is a decent beat-em-up, but with 15 stages, it can start to feel like the same thing quickly. Knights of the Round from 1991 was Capcom's next entry into the medieval fantasy genre, and again, this one has 3 playable characters. Arthur, who uses Excalibur, he's the basic balance guy. There's Lancelot, which is the character I use. He seems a bit faster, but he's also weaker. I really just like him because he has a cooler sword than Arthur, especially towards the end when it upgrades. And last there's Percival. Now, he's the most powerful, and these characters are usually called the tank in beat-em-ups. He's fine gameplay-wise, but I just can't get over how he looks. He just wears the most useless, impractical shoulder armor. Any enemy could just stab him in the chest or in the arm. Why is he so overprotective of that shoulder? I could maybe understand it if he had a bash attack where he rammed into enemies with it, but as far as I know, there's nothing like that. Anyway, the point of the game is to find the Holy Grail, which was stolen by some powerful evil knight or something. During the game, you can level up by killing the enemies and grabbing treasure. Leveling gives you slight upgrades to armor and weapons. One cool thing that you can do, I have to mention, is that when you go to collect energy, you can cut apart the food. I love the fact that when you cut apart the giant pig on a plate, it turns into a bunch of drumsticks, served on individual dinner trays. How does that work? Anyway, the point with that is, when you're playing co-op, this allows everyone a chance to collect the food or the treasure. Another thing they added was the ability to ride a horse. It doesn't seem to do a whole lot, other than maybe getting a slightly easier range of attack since you're higher up, maybe. Things like this were their attempt at breaking up the monotony, and that is the biggest problem with the beat-em-up genre in general. Honestly, they can get tiresome pretty fast, unless the designers did a good job and were clever at putting in enough variety to keep it interesting. Now, released in 1992, Warriors of Fate was a sequel to Dynasty Wars. The gameplay style is closer to Final Fight this time around, but has a larger moveset. You can toss guys through the air, smash them into the ground, and even bite their faces off. And there's 5 different characters to play as. My favorite was Kassar. He fights bare-fisted and he's really tough. My least favorite was the guy with the bow. His arrows don't have a very long range, and they just fall to the ground. The only time I really enjoyed using him was when I got other weapons that were laying around the stage. Speaking of that, you can find all sorts of weapons like swords, axes, maces, and hammers, which help keep it fun. Another thing you'll find to pick up are point books. I get collecting treasure for points, but grabbing old books seems a little out of place. There's bonus areas every so often, like a race to eat as much turkey as possible, and breaking apart wooden soldiers. Like busting up the car in Final Fight, these are always good to help break it up from the normal stages. This game has much bigger sprites than Dynasty Wars, and just looks a lot nicer overall. And while you can ride a horse sometimes, you aren't bound to it the entire game, which is a lot better. During boss fights, you can fight smaller enemies for what seems like forever. Perhaps it's a good tactic to spend some time concentrating on them to gain some extra points. And I thought it was funny that this boss spins around like Blanca. One thing you'll notice is that the amount of enemies on the screen are pretty overwhelming. It may seem like a lot, but you have powerful attacks that can break apart large groups. Though you do want to use that sparingly because it costs health. Warriors of Fate is a beat-em-up that I hadn't heard much about, and I was surprised how good it was. I thought they did a better job with this one than Knights of the Round with keeping it interesting. More characters and many more fighting moves are what sets it apart. I do recommend you try it out if you haven't played it. Capcom's next entry into the world of beat-em-ups came from a short-lived cartoon from 1993 called Cadillacs and Dinosaurs. This game takes place in the future where dinosaurs have been brought back into existence. Keep in mind, this was in the wake of Jurassic Park. The show's concept is pretty wild, and it made for some crazy boss fights in the game. There's a mad scientist that's mutating people to make dinosaur-human hybrid creatures, and they're pretty awesome. This boss, Throg, comes back 3 times, mutating into a different monster each time. It's actually pretty creative. Like most beat-em-ups, you have your balanced character, the fast one with a ranged attack, and the tank. Again, there's a good variety of moves that each character can pull off here, and what I like is when you pick up guns, they have a decent amount of ammo and a bullet meter, almost turning the game into a side-scrolling shooter like Contra for short bursts. I of course have to mention the dinosaurs. They appear every so often, some you have to fight and others seem to just wander off. There's one section where a giant foot comes down to stomp you, but most of the cool dino action comes from the dino hybrids. There's all sorts of weird creatures, and again, even one that resembles Blanca from Street Fighter 2. There isn't much Cadillac action in the game other than one section where you mow down enemies for a short while. I think they could have included a little more Cadillac action in the game, but it is there. There's a few things I find hilarious in this game. One is the go notification when it wants you to keep moving. The other thing I always laugh at is when you're picking up items, every so often there's a penny to pick up. They find entire bags of gold dust, so why bother stopping to pick up one penny, especially when you're being attacked by monsters and guys with knives? To sum up, the concept is absurd, but it doesn't matter. It's just fun that the game does a good job at keeping your attention throughout. It's definitely one of the better ones. Then there was the Punisher from 1993. In this game, there's two playable characters, the Punisher or Nick Fury. The goal is to take down Kingpin, the leader of organized crime. When you finally get to him at the end, he's in the Kingpin Hotel. Nobody will ever think to look for him there. You have a fairly decent moveset at your disposal, dashing attacks, jumping attacks, and special attacks that take health, like they all do. And again, you do rarely want to use those specials since they take the health, but what is good is that you have grenades that you can toss down, which are very effective. I have to say, I find the power-ups pretty funny. This is what Mr. Tough Guy, I beat up all the city's criminals eats. I think maybe a medical pack might have worked better than Tom and Jerry style cheese. There's some sections where you can blast away at enemies with your pistol, but I don't think that those come often enough. And I like the little Terminator references they threw in with the enemies. Also, this guy looks like he could have been Super Mecha Death Christ's half-brother. I found this one to be pretty generic overall, and again, only with 2 players, there were better beat-em-ups to choose from. Next up we have Alien vs. Predator from 1994. Looking at this now, it might seem a little confusing because most people are familiar with the movie from 2004, but this is based off of the comic book from the late 80s. There was going to be a movie for it in the 90s, but it never got off the ground past the comics, toys, and video games. The basic idea of the game is that humans unite with some predators to fight the aliens that are taking over planet Earth. The game, of course, has facehuggers, chest bursters, and everything you'd expect, but it also adds some new alien types, which are pretty awesome. One of the characters you play as is Major Dutch Schaefer, Arnold Schwarzenegger's character from the original Predator film. He's similar, but now he has a robotic arm that can smash enemies. The Predators have moves which will be familiar to anybody that's seen the films, like the triangular targeting and the discs. Everything's represented very well and is recognizable. Each of the playable characters has a unique feel to them, so you're going to want to try out each to see which one suits you best. It's definitely a cool novelty for any fan of either franchise, but as a beat-em-up, it's somewhat lacking. Other games at the time were starting to offer more, like Branching Paths, offering replay value, while this only had one path. There was an Alien vs. Predator game that was released for the Super Nintendo, but that game was far worse, so if you're looking for an Alien vs. Predator game to play, this is the one to go for, even if it has a few minor shortcomings. Now, if you were interested in the mechs from Captain Commando, Armored Warriors is going to be the game for you. This entire game is nothing but giant mechs beating the crap out of each other. The thing that sets this game apart is that after you defeat an enemy, they drop their weapon attachments, which you can swap with your own. This offers for a large variety of things to fight with, like machine guns, laser swords, laser guns, drills, flamethrowers, electric arms, all sorts of awesome stuff that keeps it entertaining. You do have limited ammo, however, so when you run out, it's just your basic attacks. I personally really like the yellow mech because his jump attacks look awesome. The game's fun just because it's crazy. Look at the amount of enemies on the screen. Imagine this with 4 players, it's gotta be even more insane. And apparently, when playing with multiple people, you can combine mechs, which sounds awesome, though I haven't tried it yet. You collect all sorts of stuff appropriate for machines to grab, like wrenches, screwdrivers, and even zip disks. That certainly dates the game. There's this one stage where you have to free prisoners from jail cells, sort of like Temple of Doom. When you let them out, they run around like waving idiots. Meanwhile, there's giant robots everywhere that could crush them flat. What's the point of rescuing them if they're gonna throw themselves into harm's way like that? Do they have a death wish? You can't run those guys over, but you can run over enemy humans, which is pretty funny. There was never a home port made of the game, so this one might be off of most people's radar. I think this one especially would benefit from playing with friends for the combiner aspect. Worth trying out if you like giant robots. So as for the Dungeons & Dragons games, I'm not going to say a lot about them here since I've already done a full review about it. If you want to hear my thoughts on those, check the links in the description. To sum up my thoughts though, my basic feelings are that the sequel, Shadows over Mystara, is superior to the original, Tower of Doom, because it has many more attacks and magic spells, and also much better sprite animation. Many beat-em-ups can become repetitive, but this is one that offers more than enough variety to keep your interest the entire time. The item wheel to select magic attacks makes it endlessly amusing. Shadow over Mystara is one of my favorite beat-em-ups of all time. If you're gonna play any, play that one. Capcom's final 2D beat-em-up was Battle Circuit in 1997. It's a very weird game with 1950s sci-fi theming. So the main thing that sets this one apart is having the ability to upgrade moves after each level. You collect coins from fighting enemies or from picking them up after breaking crates. When you kill an enemy, it gives them to you automatically, but if you break a box open, you have to pick up the coins individually, which I found sort of odd. Anyway, after you collect enough money, there is a good variety of different things to buy, like upgrades to current moves, totally new moves, or even the option to increase your energy meter. Because of this, it makes you want to stick with one character so that you can max out their abilities. I found myself often attacking smaller enemies during boss battles to prolong the level and get more money. Also unique is this game's sense of humor. There's cursing every so often, and even an Elvis Presley impersonator. I can imagine people thinking that that's how I would design a game if I made one. And of course, it's the overweight, late 70s jumpsuit era Elvis. But I do always love when games pay tribute to Elvis. Some other examples are in Bill and Ted on NES, Tot from Wind Waker, and Blue Suede Goo from Clay Fighter. What makes this game great is when your characters are upgraded, you have such a huge moveset that the entire screen is just madness. The sprite animations in this game are fantastic, there's a great sense of humor, appealing character designs, and a huge variety of moves. It's a shame that this game was never given a home console port, so this is a good one to go back and try out if you haven't heard of it before. In general, I'm usually more of a fan of arcade games where the goal is to get a high score. Games like Miss Pac-Man have more replay value to me because you can always go back and try to top your best score. However, the appeal of the beat-em-up was being able to play with your friends at the same time. Being in an arcade and talking with your friends was half the fun. And a more modern example of a side-scrolling beat-em-up I really enjoy is Castle Crashers. In an age where first-person shooters dominate the market, it's always nice when a good old-fashioned beat-em-up makes an appearance.